Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. My name is Dan Gillerman. I'm the chairman of the Israeli board of the America-Israel Friendship League. And I'm very honored and very privileged to open this very special webinar for you tonight. We will be meeting the CEOs of three major multinational global American companies, Google, Intel, and Microsoft. And we will be discussing why those companies chose Israel and how Israel has become such an amazing success story for them. Now, we're doing this at a very special time. As I'm sure all of you know, Israel is going through a tough few days at the moment. We are under attack by a vicious terror organization, which has been sending rockets to all of our cities, including Tel Aviv, where we are, Jerusalem, and other places. But the mere fact that we can have this discussion tonight, and we are joined by the major players who will be with us this evening, is a testament to the resilience of Israel, to the fact that it is in fact business as usual, that we will not let anyone disrupt our way of life or our civilization. And I hope very much that we can complete this webinar successfully, learn a lot from the distinguished and great speakers we have, and have the answer to why they are in Israel and what Israel is for them. I can tell you I'm chairman of the Blackstone Group in Israel, and the president and CEO of Blackstone told me that they invest basically in places which are tech hubs and where the young people drink latte and eat quinoa. I'm not sure this is the reason that brought Michal, Yaniv, and Meir to bring their companies to Israel, but it may have been somewhere at the back of their minds. In any case, I'm very, very proud to present to you this distinguished panel and the moderator, Yossi Vardi, Mr. High Tech, Mr. Internet in Israel, who is also a very close friend. So thank you for the American-Israeli Friendship League. Thank you all for joining us, and hopefully we'll have an enriching and exciting evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here. There is an endless discussion what makes Israel such a hotbed for ingenuity, innovation, creativity, entrepreneurship, etc. And there are many answers, but one of the most important answers is the special structure of the ecosystem, where you see working together of giant companies with very small companies. Each one of the people you are going to hear today is running a major part of his corporate company, and while running the business, they also very tuned to the young startups in Israel, and you will be here about what they are doing in that space, in addition to many others. As Danny said, we have here with us Michal Blumenstieg-Braverman, who is the Microsoft corporate VC, CTO of AI and security, and Microsoft Israel R&D Center CEO. So nice to have you, Michal. We have also with us Yaniv Garti, who is also a corporate VP of Intel, and is the 5G private network general manager and the Intel Israel general manager. So you see they have both corporate and Israeli responsibility. And last but not least, my very good friend, Meir Brand, who is the founder and the ex-head of Israel site for Google. If you don't know what is Google, you will be hearing about it very soon. It's an up-and-coming company, and now is a corporate VC in charge of growth in EMEA, and his territory covers 73 countries with 1.6 billion people. So you really have the top of the breed of what Israel can produce in terms of brain, manpower, and management. We are going to try and understand why these huge companies are coming to such a small place that, as Danny said, from time to time face really big challenges, and why they are investing in the area, and what the plans of the companies. It's really, I think, an astonishing story. Yaniv, I would like to start with you. Your president, your CEO visited Israel recently and made some really exciting announcements. So can you share with us what were the announcements, and why the hell your CEO had to drag all the way over here in order to do what you are going to do? And tell us a little bit about Intel in Israel. For your information, Intel is the #1 employer of high-tech in Israel. The size of the high-tech labor force in Israel is something like 330,000 people, and out of them, I think Intel is employing 13,500, or maybe by today it's already more. So Yaniv, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Yossi, and hi to everyone. So a bit of a background about us. We have been around in Israel for quite some time. We can go into that later on in terms of what makes companies come to Israel. But the presence of Intel in Israel started back in 1974 with Dov Fruman. For the geeks of us, he's the guy who invented EEPROM, and he kind of came from the US to Israel as an Intel employee and basically opened a shop of 5 guys. Since then, as Yossi mentioned, we have grown into having 14,000 direct employees. We have about another 45,000 indirect employees, which are part of our own ecosystem in Israel. You mentioned Pat, and in a second I'll come to the announcement itself. But in terms of background, Pat Gelsinger is the new CEO of Intel. He's in office for about 2 months, and in interviews he said that Israel is kind of a microcosm of Intel. We focus here on compute, so high performance compute. We do AI, we do communications and cyber, and then so we develop the technology and the products, and we also have a big manufacturing campus where we also manufacture our chips, our products. The announcement that Pat made was threefold. One is an announcement of a new campus in Haifa, which is going to be added to the campus we have, and we're going to increase the capacity we're going to have in Haifa for another 6,000 employees. And by the way, we own our buildings. That's kind of a philosophy of Intel. So that's a $200 million investment. He announced that Mobileye, which is an Intel company that was acquired about 4 years ago.
For how much?
For $15.7 billion. Yeah, a bit of a pocket money, and I'm kidding. It's the largest acquisition, not only in the history of Israel, but also in the history of Intel. So their campus in Jerusalem, it's a $400 million investment for an autonomous driving technology campus. And the third one is, we have announced about 18 months ago that we're going to invest in a new fab, new manufacturing facility in Israel. For the total investment amount is $10 billion. And we have announced that we have started to actually work on that. So if you go to Kiryat Gat in the southern part of Israel, which is kind of heavily bombarded right now, you'll see machinery on the ground. So it's in action. So all in all, kind of that adds up to about, I think over the years in terms of investment in campuses and acquisitions, Intel has invested about $50 billion in Israel. And the reason it continues to invest in acquisitions and in what we have is because of the, we look at that from Intel Israel standpoint. It's the contribution and the impact we have on Intel and on, as Intel on anything that has to do with digital transformation, where we play a role. And it cannot be disconnected from where we operate. So it all kind of sits on top of the Israeli culture and the Israeli innovation ecosystem.
Good, thank you very much. We will come to the culture, the cross culture, because it's a very interesting thing. Before I release you, one quick question. In how many startups did Intel invest through the years?
I'll start with answering
that. You can invent a number, nobody can challenge you. So
no, I'll start with a smaller number. We have made a total of 23 acquisitions of Israeli companies.
This is acquisition and investment?
That's acquisition. Investment, it's a 3 digits number.
Yeah, quite amazing. Meir and Michal, you have a challenge to answer. Meir, let me go back to you. Go to you, and we will keep Michal to the end. Meir, before we started this webinar, you told me a little bit about the future plans and dreams of Google in Israel. Can you share with us the experience and especially the plans for the next coming years, and why Google is betting on Israel so much, other than the wonderful management, the local management that they have? May go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Yossi. It's a great pleasure to be here with this distinguished panel and also with a wonderful audience. I know we all share at least 2 passions, passion for Israel and passion for technology. So it's great to be here. I'll actually start with zooming out, Yossi, on why multinationals are so attracted to Israel. And I think all of us know that Israel is really a hotbed of innovation, and it's a world leader in science and technology. And whatever metric you can think of, whether it's startups per capita, R&D as a percentage of GDP, VC per capita, and all of those, we're pretty much in the top of the world. And as you said, Yossi, we've built a wonderful ecosystem, which has a few pillars, and I think it's worthwhile just saying a few words on this fabulous ecosystem. I think the first pillar is, of course, the talent, the entrepreneurs, the developers, the startups, right? That's kind of one key pillar in this ecosystem. The other pillar is a pillar of education, institutions like the Technion and other prime universities. Actually, the military service plays a role in education and technical education. And that would be the second pillar of this ecosystem. The third one is multinationals, which is, you have a great representation of those here. And the fourth pillar is VCs, right? Those who invest. And the beautiful thing about this ecosystem is that it's all dynamic, and we're constantly seeing movements from people in one part of the pillar of the ecosystem to another. So for example, Gil Schwade, who founded Checkpoint, actually spilled over technology from the military service to commercial use, right? So moved from the military to a startup, if you want. Same with Mobileye. You have a lot of professors that are moving from education and working, and the multinationals are opening their own startups. You have people from multinationals opening startups, and you have multinationals acquiring startups, right? So there's a dynamic portion of this where that increases the strength of the ecosystem. And above all, I think it's about the culture, right? We talk a lot about the entrepreneurial culture here, the fact that, people are scrappy, they're full of chutzpah, they think out of the box. We like to call it at Google 10x moonshot thinking. So all this creates this fabulous ecosystem of innovation. And we're just seeing it get stronger and stronger over the years. Specifically on Google, Yossi, I had the privilege to set up Google's operation in 2005. I still remember the interview where I asked Google, what does good look like? So what will it take for us to be successful? And of course, I got a very googly answer. Well, you should tell us what that means. Israel looks like a really interesting, innovative place. And maybe if you can build an operation of 100 people or so, maybe if you can build a business operation of X dollars or so. And the wonderful thing is, fast forward 10 years, we have 1,600 people operation, more than 10x. And then the revenue is even more than 10x than what they predicted, right? So while they knew that Israel is something special, they didn't know how big it can become.
And then so they came and confiscated you, and we lost you.
No, so listen, the second question, Yossi, is what do we do here and what are our plans? And I think it's really interesting that if you think about the R&D side, and I know this is true for my colleagues as well, actually, Google in Israel is doing the most strategic stuff of the company. The first part of the R&D center here was in search. Search, of course, is the core competence of Google. And usually companies like to keep the core competence close to their hearts, to the headquarters, but not in this case. Some of the biggest innovations of search in Google came from our R&D in Israel. Great examples would be Google Autocomplete, that all of you know, that you start a word and it completes it. That saves 200 years of typing every day. The same goes to Google Trends and Duplex. So that's kind of one strategic area. We also acquired Waze. I think all of you know Waze, and that created another strategic area for us on the hub around geo and maps. And Waze in many ways is a poster child of Israeli innovation. And then the last part on innovation, also business innovation is really driven strongly from Israel, particularly thinking how we help startups become from small startups to unicorn and being able to advertise and target their audiences across the world, across geo, across time zones, and do it in a very targeted way. And then lastly, Yossi, we just recently announced how we even increase our presence in Israel, both across Google and Alphabet. We just announced we're going to build a cloud region in Israel. We announced
Which means?
Which means building a data center, a cloud center. We also announced we're going to open a chip design center in our R&D center, head by Uri Frank. And that's going to be another very strategic, important area for our R&D center. We
what
just
announced.
Sorry?
What Yaniv Gerti is saying about this plan of yours?
Well, we can soon ask him. But before we do that, Yossi, just two more things. We brought the moonshot, right? Google X, our moonshot lab. We brought that first time out of the US to Israel, first outside of the US as an experiment. And we're going to see what we can do with the brilliant scientists and entrepreneurs in Israel with Google X.
Can you explain very shortly what is moonshot and what is Google X? For those who are not privileged to know.
Google X is we call it a moonshot factory, but the idea is to create breakthrough innovation over the long run. So this is innovation over the next 5 or 10 years on things that almost seem as science fiction. So about 10 years ago, we came with this idea of, an autonomous car. And now it's already become Waymo, right? And it's already spun off. But that's an example of an idea that back then sounded like science fiction, but today we are all talking about autonomous cars. And it's those kind of breakthrough innovations and ideas that we want to get out of X. Many of them fail, as you know, Yossi. Innovation is also about high risk, and high risk means high failure. But there are also amazing things that come out of it, and we're looking forward to bring it to Israel.
Good. One quick question. Why all of a sudden Google X, what is the mechanism? What behind they decided to move to Israel? I think it's very interesting.
Look, I think I encourage you, Yossi, to invite Adi Aaron, who is an Israeli. She's an amazing Israeli who ran strategy and ops at Google X and is coming to actually build this laboratory experiment in Israel. And she's done a terrific job at Google X, and I'm sure she will do a terrific job also in Israel. If you ask why they did it, it's for the first part of my answer, right? They've looked at hotbeds of innovation. They looked at all these metrics that I talked about at the beginning, and it was clear that Israel, together with Silicon Valley, is really top-notch in terms of this ecosystem.
The point I'm trying to emphasize is that part of the mechanism, part of this wonderful synergy between US companies and Israel is Israelis executives which are working in the companies, because what you described, that Adi Aaron wanted to come back and she convinced the corporate to open Google X. Yaniv mentioned Dov Furman, the legendary one. I would say that without his invention, there was no laptop. You know, without EEPROM, you cannot have laptop. And same happened in Microsoft when Moshe Lichtman wanted to come back to Israel. They go to their superiors and tell them, we want to open a plant in Israel. And this mechanism is working time and again and again and again. And it shows a number of things. Number one, it shows the real interest of the Israelis abroad. And it shows you the mechanism, which is very, very effective. And last but not least, and I hope we will be able to elaborate on it, these people are mitigating the huge differences in culture between the companies. Michal, we are now going to you. And
okay.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and the same question. Tell us about Microsoft contribution to Israel contribution to Microsoft, and your future plans.
Sure. So first of all, great to be here. And very excited about it. I think it's very important, the relationship between Israel and the high tech in Israel and the global community. So thanks for having me. So why Microsoft is in Israel? So a lot of the things that were said is also true for Microsoft. The per capita, one of the highest per capita startup nation. Now it's been unicorn nation, etc. We just moved to an amazing new campus in Herzliya, which is the greenest, which was hundreds of millions of dollars of investment just in the building. We are the greenest building in Israel. And the thing is, we just finished building it, and it was supposed to hold us for 15 years. And the day we finished it, we are starting to build another one because we grew so much ahead, so much ahead of that, of the expectations. I can tell you that during the last year, which was obviously COVID, we grew more than 27% only from. By the way, I have two roles. I have a global, which is the CTO of Cloud and AI Security. And until COVID-19, I was once a month in Redmond, next to Seattle. And then as of February of last year, I became the CEO, the general manager of the Microsoft Israel R&D Center. And as I said, we grew at that time almost 27%, and in the last 2 years almost 50%. So there's a lot of growth, and we are going to continue in that growth. I think around the ecosystem, I will tell my own personal story and how I arrived to Microsoft. Because before I arrived to Microsoft, and actually you mentioned Moshe Lichtman, when I was the general manager of RSA Israel, he tried to bring me to Microsoft, and I didn't want to leave Microsoft to leave RSA. When I left RSA, and Microsoft approached me again, and then they flew me to Redmond, and Satya Nadella was just becoming the CEO. And I come from a strong cyber background. Prior to joining RSA, I was in the leadership team of Sayota. Sayota is one of one of the first company to employ machine learning to cyber, to security. Now, there is no way to do cyber without machine learning. But back in 2006, we were quite innovators. And that's the reason RSA acquired my company. You might know the CEO, it's Naftali Bennett. He went, after the acquisition, he went to politics, and I became the general manager of RSA in Israel, which grew from this startup. So, why is it connected? So why Microsoft brought me to, wanted to get me? Because they want me to build the cybersecurity business, the product lines. Because until then, that was about 7 years ago, Microsoft did a lot of security, but mostly in the infrastructure level of the cloud, of the operating system, but not as a product. And that's why they brought me. And Satya Nadella wanted to convince me to relocate to Redmond because he said it will be much easier to do it in Redmond. And I lived for 9 years in the United States because I went to school in Columbia University, and I also worked in the United States. And the center of gravity of my life is Israel now. So I didn't want to relocate. And I explained to Satya why in cyber actually an advantage that I am in Israel because of the amazing ecosystem and because of the technology unit. And I came from a technology unit in the army and later went into the industry. I came from a startup that was acquired by a multinational, and it grew, the startup grew a lot within that multinational. And it's really the combination of the technology units in the army that produce constant stream of technologists and a lot of startups. I was in startups, and the relationship between the startups and the multinationals, and that is a sort of a cross-pollination that is very unique to Israel, and especially especially in cyber. And of course, the academia is very important as well, because we have very strong academia in cryptology and other areas that are very important to cyber. So I convinced Satya that I can do it from Israel. I told him that I will fly a lot. And that's true. As I said, since until the COVID-19, I flew once a month. And just to make a long story short, we did a lot. We now half of the R&D center in Israel is more than half actually is doing cyber. And it was a combination of homegrown innovations. We had our own startup, which we initiated the products like Azure Security Center and Azure Sentinel and some other products were initiated in Israel, and a combination of startups that we acquired in the past 7 years. So we acquired actually 6 cybersecurity startups. As a matter of fact, the last acquisition was a CyberX that was in the midst of COVID-19, where everybody worked at home. So not just the acquisition process was remote, but also onboarding a new company to a multinational company happened remotely. And I can tell you that the team is doing an amazing job. So, and that's really the essence of the unique ecosystem that we have in Israel. The cross-pollination between the Israeli startups and the big companies in Israel that are native to Israel, for example, in cyber, like Checkpoint and Verit, etc., and the multinational, it's really nowhere to be found. Where else in the world you have 10 square kilometers where you have people from Microsoft and Google and Intel and IBM and GM, and we all know each other because it's Israel, 1 degree of separation. We exchange ideas. We all know the ecosystem, the startups, especially in Manhattan as the CTO, I constantly meet startups. And it creates a great ecosystem that helps the startups of the multinational and create a lot of innovation. And that's how I convinced Satya. So what we are doing in addition to cyber, so obviously cyber is very, very important. We are focused on cloud and AI. That's another major thing that we are doing. And we are trying to do things that the question, why is Israel, is easily answered. Because obviously Israel is remote and Israel is not cheap. The engineers in Israel are not cheap. So everything else that can be done in a different location doesn't make sense to do it in Israel. So only the more difficult problems, the developments, the innovation that cannot be done anywhere else, we are leading that. So a lot of AI, a lot of the cognitive services, a lot of the analytics. Obviously, we also have hardware, healthcare. We just opened another team of autonomous cars. Excuse me?
I said, wow.
Yeah. And as Satya Nadella says, why we invest in Israel? Only because of the talent. And because the Israeli market is not very big, it's important. I think it's a very advanced market. By the way, we just announced that we are going to open a data center. So this is another multi-billion investment in Israel, in addition to the R&D, which will continue to grow and continue to bring more innovation to Microsoft. We also very much invested in the local market, and we are building here a very
do a joint venture with Meir and save half of the money.
Yeah. So so that's in a nutshell. Obviously, I can elaborate on each area, but I will, let's continue the discussion.
Okay, let me go to the next question. We know that the Israelis are very talented, no argument about it, but the Israelis are very opinionated. They know better what you should do. They are not easy to manage. Actually, herding Israelis is like herding cats. They are impossible. Let's admit it. You know, they will create wonderful things, but it's a torture to deal with them. How you deal with your management at the home companies? How you mitigate over the difference in cultures? I must, Yaniv, I must quote Daddy Perlmutter, who was one of the top officers of Intel. He used to run the Israeli site a number of generations before Yaniv, and he said, when I call my engineers in the United States, I tell them what they have to do. All of them write it down. After 40 minutes, we finish the meeting and everyone go to do his job. When I call my Israeli engineers to tell them what to do, first we have to spend 20 minutes where I have to convince them that I have to tell them what to do, not they have to tell me what to do, because they say, we know the product much better than you, so we will tell you what you should do in order to empower us to do the project. So how do we bridge over this culture gap?
Is that a question for me, or we are doing...
No, for the three of you. Yaniv, why don't we start with you?
You know, there is a difference in cultures. And I think the wise thing any company can do is, instead of trying to contain the beast, is actually see what benefit does it bring to the culture of the company. You know, we have been throwing names of people from the past. One of the founders of Intel was Andy Grove. It was a dear Jewish person. And he has a few kind of fundamental views of how a culture should look like. He's a guy that will almost worship confrontation, but make it constructive. You will not find many cultures better than the Israelis about doing that. It's about focusing on achievement rather than rank, which is exactly the story you gave about Daddy. No matter what your rank is, if you didn't achieve much in your life, no one is going to listen to you. But that's another kind of a great aspect of a culture that you want to bring into a company. I do think that and that's an aspect of what we do here, and I'm sure Meir and Michal can comment on that. I think our jobs here is part of our job here is to take the best of the company culture, take the best of the Israeli culture, and find a way to combine it and make sure it doesn't clash. So you copy parts of the Israeli culture into the company culture and make those connections. But I think it's either Michal or Meir mentioned about Israel becoming a unicorn country. You cannot become a unicorn country without knowing how to develop product at scale. You learn how to do a product at scale at companies such as Google, Microsoft, Intel, and others. And the alumni of people that used to work for any of us and other companies that we go startups, big companies, startups, we kind of zigzag a bit. The ability to take that culture also outside of the MNCs, the multinationals, and bring it back to the ecosystem, I believe helped a lot maturing the ecosystem to the level where it's not just a startup that goes into a big series and gone, being acquired. You see them growing and maturing and also taking a bigger part of the most strategic elements of what the multinationals are doing.
Yeah, very good. Meir, your take on the culture difference.
Yeah, look, it's interesting. There are cultural similarities and there are cultural differences. And let me actually start with a few of the similarities that we take for granted, Yossi. I think if we zoom out, on the country level, clearly US and Israel have strong shared values and culture, a culture of democracy, of diversity, of freedom of expression. Probably Danny Gillerman is the best of everyone in this panel to talk about this, as he was the ex-ambassador of the United Nations. But actually, even if you zoom in, Eric Schmidt, when he used to visit Israel, he used to say, Startup Nation is very googly. That's what he said. Startup Nation in Israel is super googly. And what he meant by that is chutzpah, entrepreneurial culture, scrappiness, lots of talent, thinking 10x, out of the box. That's very much also Silicon Valley, Google, and Israel. So there's these similarities, right? But of course, like many of you said, there are also significant differences. I spotted two that are worthwhile talking about. One is thinking, what's the long-term that you're thinking? So what's the time horizon you're thinking? I think Israel Startup Nation originated with a short-term thinking, right? And of course, this is natural. You'll see we live in the Middle East, right? Now we're all living in a tense time. People tend to think in the Middle East, will I live tomorrow or next week or next month? So their time horizon is a bit shorter. And I think, in the US, you probably have longer term thinking and longer term horizons. Of course, as Yaniv mentioned, we're now scaling up and we're maturing. So we're also developing some of that. I think the other difference is where the strength of Startup Nation originated versus, the US. And I think in Israel, a lot of the tech originated from deep tech insights and deep tech knowledge rather than consumer or marketing insights, which we often see in startups in the US. And initially, we also lacked management skills. But again, as we scale up and as we mature, a lot of this has changed in the past 10 years. We're seeing a lot of young professionals like Michal, like others, like myself, who was working and studying in the US, working in global tech companies, and then bringing it back, that knowledge kind of to Israel. And today you have serial entrepreneurs with lots of global experience and knowledge. And lastly, on the role of country manager of these companies, you know, many times I think about the analogy, Yossi, of these bicycles. Remember in the past, you'd have these bicycles with a very small wheel and a very big wheel. And you would ride on that. The small wheel is connected to the big one. The big one is the corporate, and the small wheel was, you know, are these multinationals here in Israel. And their speed is different. Of course, the big wheel goes much slower, at a slower pace. The small wheel goes at a much faster pace. But you, as the country manager, have to coordinate these wheels so the bicycle will move forward. So that's a bit about the role of the country manager.
That's very interesting. Michal, before we go to you, I would like to put a little bit of light on what Yaniv and Meir said. Part of the very important transformation that the Israeli ecosystem went through in the last 10 years, moving from small, what we call startup, to scale up, part of the success should be attributed to these three companies and they alike, because they really brought the management procedures and styles and culture which enabled the local Israeli talent to develop itself to run big companies, because nobody knew here how to run big company 20 years ago. And if you look on the whole ecosystem of unicorns, you will see that many of the VCs or the angels or the top management came from the big companies and got into the mindset of the big companies. Not all of them, but some of them. Michal, I would like to ask you about mitigating the culture, and also I would like to ask you, and then we will go back to Meir and Yaniv, about diversity in the Israeli high-tech, diversity and corporate responsibility. I know that these topics...
So I'll start from the culture. Sure.
Please, go ahead.
I'll start from the culture. There are several answers. So first of all, I think that Microsoft under Satya Nadella, by the way, Satya is really amazing, is really a learning company that constantly evolving and encourage actually people to ask questions, to challenge, and to come with ideas, and not to have a consensus, which is for me perfect and for Israel perfect. So we are flourishing, and that's why is the reason that we grew so much under Satya in Israel, because I think he really understands the Israeli spirit. I always say that Satya, we have like a urban theory about those kidnapped Israeli children that spread all over the world. So I will say Satya is one of them. So he has really much the Israeli spirit. But also, one of the things that obviously we are doing, we keep challenging, we keep asking questions. To me, by the way, challenge is a beautiful word. In English, in Hebrew, the word etgar, which is challenge, means something which is difficult to achieve, but when you achieve it, wow, it's amazing feeling. And I think that in English, the word challenge lost its beauty because it's become a synonymous, because of politically correct, a synonymous for difficulty. Okay, but I keep telling people what is the word challenge in Israel. It's a great, in Hebrew, it's a great word, and people understand that. And so it's great that you are encouraged that it really accepted now that we challenge people. And another thing, it's partnership. It's really not saying we are the smartest, because there are smart people all over the world. Okay, but try to create those partnerships and try to see many times. Okay, if we are not able to convince indirectly, let's see how we can show that this idea for a new product, it's really so important to the growth of whatever, the cloud, etc. So leveraging very first of all creative way of communicating and creating partnership. I think that's something that helped very very much. Another thing, the fact that we are Israelis and we put everything on the table means that we discover problems in communication, or something goes wrong very fast. So we can put it on the table, maybe shout a little bit, but afterwards resolve, continue, and make a progress. And actually that resonates well with the Americans once they understand it. So in general...
Can I interrupt, Michal? I would like just to add that your challenge that you are describing has in Israel a very special flavor. It's not only to resolve the problem, but also to show to the rest of us that we were able to resolve it, you know? So it's a challenge with defiance. You combine the two things.
Exactly.
A special flavor of challenge.
It's like having a mountain, but you know that you're going to conquer this mountain. It's not a mountain that will be a failure. It's a mountain for you to work very hard to climb, but to get to the top. So that's a challenge. Diversity. Okay. So diversity is very important. First of all, we all know there are so many researchers that the more diverse the company is, the more successful it is long term. Okay. And I don't need to convince you that. But what we are doing in diversity. So we are doing in diversity, obviously, with why diversity is important for us. Because we want to get as many good engineers as possible, and we want to make sure that we get to the engineers, no matter whether they are women or Arabs or people who are on the autistic spectrum, but amazing engineers, people with disability. So we want to get to everyone. So it's really a business need to be diverse.
It's also important for the society.
And also it helps the society, so it's really a win-win. I can tell you that it's very important for me, in addition to action to women. And by the way, specifically with women, is to work with young girls, because I think I was always in math, in computer science since I was in high school, and I was very fortunate to have a father that from the age of 3 played with me chess and encouraged me, and I was climbing on trees, etc. But I think it's very important to give to women, to young girls, role models and encourage them to dare, because one of the reasons that there are more men in high tech is because girls are not encouraged from very young age to take a stand, to dare. They are more encouraged to be careful. So I'm trying to change this equation. And that's why I talk with many girls. We have to start. We want more women in high tech. We have to start very early, even in kindergarten. So I'm going, and many other people in Microsoft are going and talking girls in schools, etc. We support lots of organizations of, like, for example, DigiGirls and Queen Bee, which is an organization of young computer science students, etc. So working with the younger generation before they hit the workforce is something that we do a lot, and we constantly increase the number of women, the percentage of women in technology in Microsoft. Arabs. We opened Arabs is very important, because I think that we have to make sure that the Arab population in Israel thrives and is successful, and to have them part, and to make sure that they are part of the high tech society, the high tech company, the high tech ecosystem. So we opened a site in Natzrat. We have, by the way, 4 sites in Israel. We have in Herzliya, the biggest campus. We have in Haifa. We have in Tel Aviv a big campus, and we opened several years ago in Nazareth. And the reason, yeah,
nice.
So yeah, so we and since we opened the site in Nazareth, we were able to multiply the number of Arabs that we have in Microsoft, the engineers, in a factor of 5, and it keeps growing. And expand a lot, and it's not just increasing the number, but what to me, diversity is not about quota, it's not about affirmative action. I think affirmative action is very bad for women, very bad for minorities. So I'm all for identifying where we have a blackers, but never have a quota, because I think it's very bad. So for example, with the Arab population, we understood that we have 2 problems. In addition to the fact that we need to go in a track in order to make sure that we make them more accessible, that we are more accessible, we understood that the Arab candidates don't know how, don't have enough preparation how to get interviewed. So we prep them how to interview. We also prep the managers who have to interview the Arab candidates, because you have to interview them differently. They were not like, for example, myself in a technology unit in the army. So the interview need to be different, but we once you understand that the process has to be different, but if you change the process, you get the best people, you have a win-win. Again,
we will have to stop here because we are running out of time, but thank you, this was great, and congratulations about the work you do, and I hope the audience sense not a commitment, but an enthusiastic way that you approach the topic. Yaniv, diversity.
Yes, so I'll be precise of the time. Diversity for us is it's not about philanthropy. We do believe that everyone here that speaks Hebrew know that chevra is a dual meaning word in Hebrew. It's a company and society. For a company to strive, it has to thrive. So it has to be within a society that thrives, and vice versa. But for us to be able to actually continue our growth and impact and drive the next waves of revolution, we have to increase our reach into other sectors of society. We are the largest employer of Arab engineers, both men and women. We are also the largest employer of ultra-Orthodox Jews.
You pioneered it. Your site in Jerusalem pioneered employing.
Started it in Jerusalem and with Arab, and then now it's also in Kiryat Gat.
Right.
And you'll find us with Arab engineers. It's in Haifa and Kiryat Gat. So it's also kind of based on the demography. But diversity doesn't stop only with minorities. Michal mentioned women. There's also the aspect of social mobility and taking people from different social, economic levels and push them up the ladder. And it's all part of the fact that I think we are seeing a worrisome phenomena of the high-tech sector kind of being kept at about 9% of the workforce in Israel. If we want to really kind of continue and drive this ecosystem, and you were kind of joking about when Meir said about opening a silicon shop, that's great. We want to see more companies coming in, but for us to create the talent to do so, we have to increase those circles of people within Israel, of the population that is involved in high tech. And the last comment, we don't have time for that. I fully agree with what Michal said. We are starting, and that's something we do at Intel, and we're doing that in partnership with other companies as well. You start at early ages, early high school. That's where you have to find them and basically take them hand in hand and show them a path, a future. And with that, and some other actions, you have a better choice of them actually coming.
Thank you very much. Meir, one sentence, because I have to give back the baton to Dan Gillerman, otherwise he's not going to invite me to moderate any other session ever. So one word about diversification, Meir.
Yeah, no problem. So look, first of all, I think Michal and Yaniv did a great job on talking about this. So I'll just add another prism. They all talked about, like Google, the importance of diversity and inclusion in our companies culturally, why it's so critical. I think we need to add the angle, Yossi, on why it's so critical for the future of high-tech in Israel. Because really what you're seeing now is that the potential in Israel with our ecosystem is huge, but the main problem is shortage of talent. And actually diversity is a big part of the solution of shortage. Already today, you have about 20,000 jobs, open roles in companies that we can't find the talent for, right? And the only way to do it is, as you heard, going from 10% of the workforce to 20 or 25% of the workforce by investing in underrepresented groups, in Arabs, in ultra-Orthodox, in women. You've heard already on some great programs that Intel and Microsoft, Google also runs some very skilled programs around Mind the Gap and helping bring more women into the circle of education and workforce. And there's much more work for us to do if we all want to grow in Israel. So the only way we can grow is if we will really deepen this diversity. Of course, we'll probably have to also go beyond that, Yossi, and also bring people from outside of Israel on flex visas, very similar to what the US does, where you have someone coming from outside, working and learning in Startup Nation, and then going back to their countries. But this is, of course, a different complex question of how do we build up the next generation of engineers and software engineers?
Guys, you have done a phenomenal job of shameless Zionist promotion of Israel, and Ambassador Gilerman, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Yossi, for moderating in such an excellent way and conducting this orchestra of those three incredible soloists, Michal, Meir, and Yaniv. Thank you for this very insightful and very, very enriching discussion. It has made me, and I'm sure everybody who listened, proud to be Israeli, proud of you for the great job you've done and for spreading this gospel. And I hope very much that your leading by example will bring many more companies to what I keep saying is following Silicon Valley, and Silicon Alley is the world's Silicon Valley, which is Israel. I'm glad that we managed to have this discussion in the midst of difficult times and prove again that at the end of the day, Israel's resilience and Israel's excellence and creativity is so aptly described by you, will triumph. So thank you very, very much. And on behalf of the America-Israel Friendship League, I'm really, really proud to have had this excellent, enriching, and insightful panel. Every minute of it taught us more and made us more aware of the excellence that you've all brought, and proud to be part of this incredible country and this incredible industry. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.